Hello, everybody. Welcome to this very special event. We're kicking off Hispanic Heritage Month here at Talk with our Talk Special, which is our Hispanic and Latinx panel. I just want to introduce everybody to our panelists, and so kind of like to save our embarrassments butchering last names. I know it's not the most professional. We're just going to start from here and just work our way all the way down. Just introduce yourself, first name, last name, and what culture you're representing.
So I'm Samantha Sandoval, Maldonado now actually, and I graduated in 18 and 19, and I represent the Mexican culture.
I'm Juan Maldonado, graduated from here in 18 as well, and I represent the Mexican American culture.
My name is Kenny Jaramillo. I graduated 2020, and I'm representing Mexicans and Hondurans.
My name is Annie Boswell, and I did not graduate from here. I was born and raised in Mexico, and I'm fully Mexican, so I'm representing Mexico.
I'm Christian Lima, and I'm on my master's program right now, and I'm representing Brazil.
I'm Karen Soares Alvarenga, and I'm in the business and management program here, and I'm representing Brazil.
I'm Stephanie Martinez. I'm a senior here, so I'll be graduating. And I am representing Mexican American culture.
Okay, so right now we have 8 questions. I'll be asking 8 questions to everybody. With the questions, it goes from different it's different ranges from the easiest to the hardest. Just do your best, I'll say format-wise and time-wise. If we can get 2 people to answer each question, that'll be good. I don't mind the third one if you're really eager to answer the question. But there's no need to restrict yourself or hold back. This is, talk. We always want to represent freedom of speech and accountability for words. It's all about authenticity. That's what the A stands for. So for our first question, are you originally a citizen of the United States, or did you move to the USA from your original country? If anybody wants to answer that, raise your hand.
I'm a U.S. citizen, so I was born here. But both of my parents, my dad was born in Mexico, my mom was born in Honduras.
Okay. How do you feel, kind of like a follow-up question, or maybe, your parents could, if you kind of understood, how was their transition from going from Mexico to the United States when it comes to like living, probably like adjustment to work, education?
Well, I think it was more difficult for my mom because my dad came here legally. He came, his parents fixed his papers, so he came here legally. My mom didn't come here legal. She came through a train that took her from Honduras to Mexico, and then from Mexico she crossed the border. She definitely had it harder because she only came with my grandma, so my grandma was literally the only person who she had in the United States, and my dad came to a bunch of families, so I'll definitely say that my mom had a harder experience.
Will she ever apply for her citizenship?
Yes, she's a citizen now.
Because we always, oh my bad.
No, but yeah, you're good.
Because we always hear about, when it comes to becoming a citizen, getting your citizenship, it's a very long process.
Yeah, very long process. I believe it was like 7 years long. And she became a resident first. So to become a citizen, you have to be a resident. When she got married to my dad, she became a resident. And then when she became a citizen, she studied some pamphlet for like 3 to 4 years just so she can pass the exam. And then I remember being like in 2nd grade, reading the questions out loud to her so she can take her tests and whatnot. So she passed her test and she's a citizen now.
Oh, that's great.
One of the things that, if I can, that you hear a lot, you hear that a lot as a Hispanic or as a Latin American when you're living here, and people don't understand, like, why wouldn't you do things the right way, or why wouldn't you get your papers right away? For me, for example, I was born and raised in Mexico. My husband is American, so I came here, and I had the privilege to be able to come here, quote unquote, legally. But I'm going to tell you, it is not an easy process. Whether your family was coming, seeking a better life, I would love for Juan to share a little bit of his story in a little bit. Whether you were brought when you were a little kid, or in my case, I came here having a college degree, speaking the language, being bilingual. it was not an easy process. It took me over 10 years, and I had to get lawyers involved. I'm a smart person, but the system does not necessarily make it easy. So I always caution people, like, ask questions, and a lot of us are going to be willing to educate you on what it truly takes, but it's really easy to say, I don't understand why people just wouldn't just do it legally. It is not as simple as that. It's a very long, expensive, and sometimes even painful process. So I was born in Mexico and came here, but my process was not simple. It was probably just like your mom. It took me years to be able to become a citizen. So.
And besides it being hard and expensive, sometimes you got to be lucky.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you're halfway through the process and they're like, you know what, start all over.
Yep.
So it's not as easy as most people think.
Yeah.
Well, like Annie said, she wants to share a little bit of my story. We're going through the process right now. We got married in October. I've been here my whole life. I hardly know Mexico. I mean, very faint memories. So in that sense, I'm more American than I am Mexican. And yeah, the process, I mean, it wasn't until I was 18 that DACA came around. And it was a big program for me because I've been here my whole life. I wasn't able to have a driver's license ever, wasn't able to have a job legally. And for me as a teen, I'm like, what the heck, I've been here forever, I don't know anything else. And so when that came about, it was perfect, and I was able to go to college and do all that finally. And then
But he wasn't able to get like federal grants or anything, any
right.
help like that.
so I was still DACA, but then I was considered, out-of-state tuition I was charged regardless of where I went. Only California had a few grants, but yeah, I struggled a little bit more. And then we finally got married in October, and we decided, hey, we don't need a big wedding because we know all of the expenses that are coming with the lawyers and all that good stuff. But even then, the lawyers tell us like it's not 100% guaranteed.
Right.
Like we can't guarantee it because we don't know what's gonna happen. So that's always in the back of our heads. But I mean, we're hopeful, and right now we're going through it. So we're just
And
just waiting.
immigration laws change almost every month, so that part is hard too.
Yeah. That's a little bit of our story.
So, is there any way if you can explain more about DACA to help the audience understand exactly what it is in the process?
Yeah, so DACA is a deferred action for childhood arrivals. So I didn't have a choice. I was brought here by my parents. They came legally with visas, right? And I had an older brother that had passed away. So my parents used his stuff to bring me in because he had a visa. And so then they just had a better life here. I mean, my dad was an engineer in Mexico, my mom was a nurse, but even then it wasn't what they wanted. So they liked it better here as a handyman and as a cleaning lady than what they did over there. And it was just more secure. And so deferred action is for those kids that were brought younger and really didn't have a choice. And so then you're able to apply for a license. You're able to get a residency card to apply for jobs. And so that's basically what DACA is.
Anybody else wants to answer question 1 before we transition to question number 2?
Maybe we would like to share our story because it's a little different.
Okay.
We are not United States citizens. We are here in an F1 visa, that is a student visa. So it's pretty complicated being away from our family right now. And I mean, being here basically by ourselves. I came here when I was 18 on an exchange program. So I did my senior year, and then I decided to come back for college, and it's definitely hard. But it's also a really nice experience. Like, I'm grateful I'm here right now, for sure. And I just hope that at some point I can get a visa to stay for the entire time here.
Green card. Yeah. Well, I came here in the same process. I was about 18, but I finished high school back in Brazil, and then I came here. So it was a little rough, just like getting used to the new culture, because you do suffer like the culture shock. And for me, like the biggest challenge was like just being homesick, not being able to go back. Like you just can hop in an airplane and just go see your family. It doesn't work that way. Plus, it's pretty expensive, like going back to Brazil.
Especially with COVID.
And now with the COVID, things got worse. It's gonna be how long you haven't seen your family?
2 years.
I'm like a year and a half so far. So hopefully things get better with the vaccines and stuff like that, and we get to see them soon. But it's pretty rough, just getting used to the new culture. Also the language barrier. I knew enough to survive, but because of the accent, I would have to repeat myself like multiple times. And I still have an accent, but like before it was like way heavier, like stronger.
Yeah.
So to understand it, to communicate was a little, frustrating, but within time we just got used to it. So you want to share? Or you good? Okay. All right. Oh, sorry.
That kind of leads us into our second question. Was English your first language? If not, how hard was it communicate, like, in the USA, like, going out to the store or, like, in school? Does anyone?
Okay. Well, I am born here, but having Spanish-speaking parents, that was what I learned first. And then going into kindergarten, California, they have a program where it's starting here in Kansas as well, where like you could go into like Spanish classes first, and that's what I did first for about 2 to 3 years. But once they started transitioning me into English classes, I was like what's going on? Like I don't get it. But I do remember it was like pretty difficult, but you get over it and you learn.
For me, because I was born and raised in Mexico, my parents were lower class. But my parents always had the dream that their daughters, they only want to have 2 kids so that they could send us to college. And their dream was for both of their daughters to be bilingual. So my parents kind of had the vision of, we want you guys to learn a second language. Back then, Mexico was completely closed to the world. Imports or American culture was actually illegal. So I grew up being a child not knowing what American candy bars were or ever hearing English. But when we signed the NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement with the United States, and the borders open, and all of a sudden you have a country that has been closed to the culture and the world, and now we've signed a free trade agreement with the strongest economy in the world, it was a culture shock for everybody. So all of a sudden people needed to learn how to speak English because every single company was starting to require that. I was in high school and I really had to start taking it seriously, because before it was just like learn the colors, learn the pronouns, stuff like that. But in college, my school actually was a private school, so they changed the format, and then all of a sudden you were taking half your classes in full English, half your classes in full Spanish. That was hard. I graduated with a pretty high proficiency, but when I got to the States, I came here thinking, I'm bilingual. I went to college. I got a dual degree in English and Spanish in international trade and logistics. I was not prepared that when you learn English from Spanish speakers, it is such a different pronunciation. And I get here and I felt like Kevin Costner in Dancing with Wolves, start trying to speak to the Native American, because English was like a complete different language being spoken by native speakers. So even though you learn it, I feel like once you get here and you're surrounded by Americans and you have to deal with humor, with slangs, with idiomatic expressions that you don't learn when you're learning English, it was like learning a whole different language when I got here. So it was pretty intimidating, because you go out and you go to the grocery store, you go anywhere, you go to a restaurant, you're trying to order, and you feel some people are nice, some people make you feel very stupid. And what I've seen is that when I have a question, even now after being here for 20 years, I'll ask for them to repeat the question, and all they do is they just speak louder to me, and I have to tell people I'm not deaf. I just didn't understand what you said. But so it does, I feel like it does impede in how you socialize with people. And so anyway, that was my experience.
So I'll probably give like a different perspective on this, because my parents are like Mexican, so my grandparents, they came from Mexico, but I don't speak Spanish. Like I can understand it, but I don't really speak it all that well. And in a sense, it kind of makes me feel a little like small, like in that community. because like where I'm from, everybody basically speaks Spanish or they know it. But everyone, I guess, like in my generation or like my age group, they don't really speak it as much. So like it kind of creates like a barrier, at least for like me and like some family members, because they'll like speak Spanish to me, but I can't speak it back. I know what they're telling me, but I can't speak it back. Or like if I go out to stores and like someone that is Hispanic, they see me and I feel really bad when they see like a sense of comfort because they come to me because they think they can, and I can't communicate back to them. So like that's kind of hard, but it is a goal of mine to at least like learn more of the language, so that way I can speak more of it to like my parents, and then my kids are going to be able to grow up with it like that, because I don't want my kids to struggle the way I do in a sense, because I would rather them be bilingual and be able to go out into the world knowing that they can speak the language where they come from.
That's awesome.
You want to talk?
Okay. So for me, it was kind of different since I grew up in Brazil, and then I learned English since I was like 10 years old probably, and it was just different over there. I feel like you do not speak fluent English when you're learning over there. You may think that you are speaking fluent English, but it's not. Yeah, so then I left kind of knowing a little bit, and I thought I could do it, but then I got here and I just froze the first time I tried to talk to someone. I had a host family, so that was kind of helpful, but still, it was still difficult. And then I went to the high school, and then there was some mean people sometimes, and I felt like, especially for terms, like, as an example, I went for my senior year in high school, and I really wanted to be a cheerleader since we don't have that in Brazil. So the first thing that happened on my first practice was the cheerleaders telling me that I don't speak English. And I was like, well, I understand you right now, so I do. But the thing that I didn't understand is what is a low V, a high V, because those are all just cheerleading terms, and I wouldn't learn that in Brazil for sure. But that's one of the things that you just gotta learn.
Yeah.
And it's just part of the routine. You get better at it. I felt like in 3 months maybe I got better at it.
Got better, yeah.
But for sure, the 6 months that I was in high school, the first 6 months, it was hard to socialize. But after that, it's all good.
Like I said, for me, it's just like like you both said, Annie and Karen, like you think you speak like hella good, like back home, but then once you get here, it's just like they're not slowing down for you, you know, it's all rushed. Plus this language, like you have to learn this language, otherwise you're not gonna be able to like fit in, you know, and you just learn on the go, you know, like playing soccer like with Latinos, that also helped me with Spanish, which is closer to Portuguese than English, so I'm decent at Spanish. Kenny knows over there. but yeah, it's just you just learn on the go, I guess, and you have to put the work in. I'm always learning new words. Every week I learn at least 2-3 new expressions, because you want to expand your vocabulary, I guess, and you don't want to be stuck. You always want to improve, I guess. So
Yeah.
I guess that's pretty much about it.
And you never stop learning, even after 20 years.
Yeah, I'm an English teacher now, and I feel like I'm behind even the other English teachers, because I didn't grow up reading Harry Potter and these books that are normal to I guess English
Native speakers, yeah.
native speakers, and so I'm still catching up and trying to be a better teacher, so I do have to read more than most people just so I can feel like I'm caught up. And
Yeah, because it's not just a language, but it's a culture too that we
the
have to get
culture,
caught up with.
everything behind it, so gotta work a little harder.
Yeah.
Anybody want to add on until we go to our next question? All thumbs up. Okay, so for question number 3, what is the difference between Hispanic and Latinx? And if you can break it down even more, that would be great.
So, so I'm not even gonna lie. When I first got invited here, they told me about this question, and I was like, you know what? Let me do some research, because I like knowing what I'm gonna talk about. I've always been either called Latino or Hispanic, and I really didn't think that there was a difference. But as I did my research, Hispanics are people who talk Spanish. You know, you can be in Spain, or Spain is not near us, but they speak Spanish, so they're considered Hispanics. Whether you want to call yourself Latino or Latina, or Latinx, that's if you speak Spanish here in Latin America, which can be south of us in Mexico, Central America, and then South America. So that's what I got based on my research. But me as a Mexican, Honduran American, I fall under either one of them. So I wouldn't feel some type of way if you called me Hispanic and then someone else calls me Latino. But I think if you're from Spain and someone calls you Latino, then you'll feel some type of way about that. So that's based off what I know.
I think from what I know, it's the same thing. Like Hispanic is just Spanish-speaking countries, but that eliminates like Brazil,
Yeah.
Jamaica, a few other countries that we consider Latino. So it's just has to do with geography and all the background and then who Spain conquered, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know, and maybe it's just because I'm the oldest in the panel, but when I came here and people are like, oh, you're Hispanic, for some reason, I never liked that term. Don't ask me why. I don't really have a good explanation for it. But I just felt that when people said, oh, you're Latina, it just felt like it encompassed so much more of who I am. Yes, I speak Spanish, but that's not just my culture. You know, my culture is so much richer than that. So for some reason, for me, Latina or Latino on this side of the world, with Spain obviously out of it, but it encompasses not just the language that we speak, but who we are from a cultural heritage point of view. So I like the term Latina a lot more than I like Hispanic. I think it just tells a little part of the story. But
I'll be honest, I'm just lost when it comes to those terms, because we learn in school like Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, all those languages, they come from Latin, right? And then you call someone Latino, and then I'm like, okay, like, which language do they speak? But then here in America, I realized that Latino is more towards Spanish, like if you speak Spanish. But I consider myself a Latino because I speak Portuguese. So that's my understanding on the topic, you know. And it's interesting because Brazil is the only country in South America that speaks Portuguese. Like, so a lot of people actually think that our first language is Spanish, but not really. It's just Portuguese. So, and like he said, I feel like it's more geography at this point, and whatever you want to believe, I guess. All right.
You know, this will be a great follow-up question to that. How you feel about the term Latinx? Because I remember seeing like YouTube videos about there's like a lot of controversy when it comes to the term, and it just becoming new recently. Anyway, so you can just explain that, how you feel about the term.
I think this is going to be more like a generational thing too. And I want to make sure I'm not trying to insult anybody or come across as somebody who is homophobic or anything like that. But our countries are very, very traditional still. And I think that the conversations that we're having in the United States about, you know, the term Latinx, I'm telling you right now, you're not going to hear that very much south of the border. It's going to be Latino, Latina. I think the conversation needs to happen. But when I read the questions, I had to kind of Google that too, because I'm like, I'm not quite, I thought I knew what it meant, but I wanted to make sure. I don't think I feel necessarily a negative way towards it. I think it's just something that I didn't grow up with. For us, being called a Latina or Latino, regardless of what our sexual orientation was not something that was taken as a, you know, as an insult of anything. I think if anything, it makes us feel proud because somebody's acknowledging that our heritage is different than yours. I think this is something that probably more your guys' generation is starting to top. But this was a conversation that when I grew up in Mexico, you would have never heard anything like that. So I think this is more like a generational maybe difference.
Yeah, I feel like I think Latinx personally has been like the last 5 years because I didn't grow up with it either. But I did my research, and it's basically like what Annie just said. If someone calls me, they call me Latino with an O, or Latina. But there's people that with their gender that don't identify, so they don't want to be called either a guy or a girl. They're probably he, she,
Gender neutral.
yeah, gender neutral. So they don't want to be told that they're a Latino or Latina just by the way they look. So that's why they prefer Latinx. And then me personally, I don't care what you call me. It could be Latino, Hispanic, as long as you acknowledge my culture. So that's basically respectfully.
No, you got it.
Good job, Kenny.
Yeah, I can do more research on that.
Alright.
All right, now we get into like the different cultures. We'd want you guys to explain your culture and as an ambassador of the country and the cultural heritage you represent, what makes you the most proud about your culture?
How long do we
Please tell
have?
me well, for Brazil, she can add anything she wants to. I believe that Brazil is a really diverse country due to colonization and also slavery. Unfortunately, slavery not a good thing, but they're not positive in the future as far as like diversity. So we have a lot of influence from Africa as far as food. One of our favorite dishes we call feijoada, which is like black beans, rice, pork meat. So it's really good and comes from Africa. And we have one dessert called what's the name?
Brigadeiro.
No, it's from Portugal. Something Clara de Mel, something like that. It's from Portugal, so it's really diverse, and it just shows like I believe that 60-70% of the population is like light skinned black. So my grandfather was black, so I grew up in a family with no racism at all. So for me, it was really good. And Brazil is a lot about soccer. The other sports are growing now, which is good. I like that. Just being stuck on one thing is not good because once it goes down, then what else can we do, you know? So it's good that we bring up in other sports. And I think that's it, huh? I mean, we also have this holiday called Carnaval, which is, I don't know if you guys heard of it.
Oh, yes.
About the parades and dancing, and you know, it's
Is that everywhere in Brazil or is that mainly in Rio de Janeiro?
Rio. Go ahead. I think Rio is the best one as far as competition, because they do compete. Like they call like schools, so like the schools they compete between each other, and we just have fun with it. But like if you go towards the north, they have really good ones too. So it's all over the country,
over.
especially small towns. They also do it as well. So it's really nice.
And when do you guys have Carnival?
Usually February, March.
Yeah.
It's around that
The
time.
end of February.
That's interesting because I know in the Caribbean they also have Carnival as well for the different islands. I know my mom's from the U.S. Virgin Islands,
Okay.
and so I know in Georgia they'll have Carnival for like all the Caribbean and West Indies islands, and it'll always be fun. They have all the different floats, and they'll have like picnics. I ain't gonna lie, they charge a lot for food, but it'd be some great food and stuff. It's always been, because I hear about Carnival in Brazil, and especially you see movies and stuff. I know this is probably not the best example, but the movie Rio with the bird and stuff. Like, I mean, watching it as a kid, I was just like, oh, yo, this is like awesome and stuff. But this is also something that I've seen too. So actually, kind of nice to know, like, they have Carnival there, and there's also carnivals happening in the Caribbean islands. Like that's something that it's kind of cool to that like we can relate, but also makes you wonder. Like, I wonder, like, what influence, like which country, which area influenced who that started.
That's a great question.
Well, I'll do my research on it. I hit you back up and stuff. Let's get back to back to explaining your culture. You want to take my mic? Go.
Well, I just like, there's so much, just like you guys said, but the Mexican culture comes from like the Mexica people, so we're mixed, right, with Spanish and like the Mayan and the Aztecs, and I feel like our roots are just so deep because there's so much. I find myself on YouTube a lot and just go down this big portal of like the things that the Aztecs created and the Mayans, and our culture just runs deep because now we have, to this day, I mean, chocolate comes from like some of the Aztecs, and I mean, tequila is one of the personal favorites.
The good one too.
We just the fighter spirit we still, I mean, we still carry. Canelo's one of my favorite athletes right now, and he just has that fighter spirit and never leaves. And yeah, just that. That's a small margin of what I'm proud of, but if I can sum it up, it's just that fighting spirit that we have, never giving up.
Well, for me, I'm gonna be completely honest. Growing up, I hated being Mexican and Honduran because Mexican, Honduran, and American, because whenever I'll go to my mom's family, I wasn't Honduran enough. Whenever I went to my dad's family, I wasn't Mexican enough. And whenever I went to school, I wasn't American enough. So I was all over the place, and I hated that. But now that I'm older, I actually love it because I got to experience, I would like to say, the best of the three worlds, because I got to experience, the Honduran culture, the Mexican culture, and they're so alike but so different at the same time. In my Honduran culture with my mom's side of the family, it's a bunch of dancing, it's a bunch of smiling, it's a bunch of, we're very affectionate. When we see our family members, we go and hug each other, kiss each other on the cheek. And when I go to my dad's side of the family, it's very, very tough. And like Juan said, like they're just like warriors, like when I see my dad, I just see like a stone, like a stone person. And I love that because I got to get the good and the bad from both, which made me who I am today.
Kind of similar to what Christian was saying. I was born, like I said, born and raised in Mexico, but my family was interesting because Juan was explaining, in any Latin American country, because we were conquered by, in our case, the Spaniards. But the Spaniards were bringing so many cultures in their ships through slavery, through the priests that were coming with the Catholic Church, et cetera, et cetera. So we have an influx of cultures from all over Europe. My mother's side of the family was almost 100% Spanish. Like, she was born in Mexico, but her family was from Spain. And you will see in Mexico a very interesting phenomenon where people are very proud of their Spanish, of their Spanish roots. For some people, being lighter skin versus darker skin, it's a big deal. I never thought it was, but I thought it was interesting. So my mother was more on the Spanish side. My dad came from the north of Mexico, and from all the tribes, because we have many, many different Mexican tribes, there's over 400 dialects and languages in Mexico that are still spoken to this day. So I grew up with, ladies that would come and help my mom clean. And in one household, we would have 4 maids, not because we were rich, but because my mother loved to take these girls in to give them an education and kind of give them a better life. My dad couldn't afford it, so it was kind of like a social project for her. But it was so interesting because I grew up understanding that all 4 people in my household and us, there were 5 languages being spoken at a time. There are dialects and Spanish. My father is from the northern Mexico area, from Sonora. There's only one tribe that was never conquered by the Spaniards. They kind of pushed them up into the north, kind of pushing them into the desert so that they would die. The name of this tribe is the Indios Yaquis, Yaqui. So to this day, all of their features and everything, they're very much the traditional native Mexican features, but culturally, they remain very separate from the rest of Mexico. So my dad, he could almost pass almost for an African American because his skin is so dark. My mother was very light, very Spanish looking. So I am considered something called mestiza, which is a combination of those 2 races. So for me, honest to God, I think racism was something that I learned way, way later in life because I was surrounded by so many different cultures and so many different people. There was discrimination between being rich or being poor, but based on the color of your skin, I really did not encounter that till much later in life. So what makes me the proudest when people ask me, I always find it kind of sad and kind of interesting when people sometimes say to me, oh wow, you just don't act like a Mexican. And that always crushes my heart because I understand that unfortunately that is rooted on a stereotype or on a bad experience because not everybody who comes to this country representing our cultures are always going to be great ambassadors of where we come from. My dad would always tell me, because I would call home and I would just be so angry if people were either being discriminatory or racist towards me, or they would just not give me a chance to show them who I was. My dad would always tell me, you have the possibility of being mad and reinforcing that stereotype and the hatred that they have against your culture, or you can take 5 minutes to calm down and then become an ambassador of who Mexico really is and who your culture really is. So for the last 20 years, that's been a passion of mine. What makes me the proudest is not just the richness of our culture. Like Juan said, I wish people would ever travel to Mexico, not to Tijuana or to the border, but like to really go down into the center or the south of Mexico. When you start experiencing and understanding the cultures that we were founded on, the richness in culture, in science, in technology, even in the 1500s, it's insane. We were conquered by people that didn't read or write, and there we had native cultures that were doing brain surgeries. The Mayans were doing brain surgeries. They were the best astronomers. To this day, the Mayan calendar is the most exact calendar in the world. It's fascinating. But what makes me the proudest is my people. It's the heart of Mexicans, is the hardworking spirit that they have. We have gone through devastating things as a culture. I see them here, the fighting spirit and never giving up and just doing everything in their power to give their kids a better life. It is something that I've never seen before. So that's probably something that makes me the proudest.
If we need to go to the next question, that's fine.
No, if you have something to share, please share.
It's all good. Come on, Tiffany.
Okay, just like culturally speaking, where I'm from, I'm like right by the border, so I guess like technically where my house is, I'm like 30 minutes away from Juarez. So we have a lot of people like coming in and out basically every day. I was part of a cohort for like an Ivy League school program, and there was a girl in my cohort that was from Juarez, but she would cross the border every single morning to go to a high school there. And I know that a lot of kids from that specific school would come across the border, so they'd like wake up a lot earlier than most kids would to go to school just so they were able to get an education. And I never really thought to take education for granted in that sense, but like once I learned like the struggle to like go through that, it was kind of just like I became really grateful for that. And I feel like their culture also bleeds really into where I'm from El Paso, because you just see a lot of Hispanics and Mexicans there, so it's not any different to like see someone from a different race there. Like nobody judges you, like nobody really asks like, oh, where are you from, we kind of just accept one another. And coming here was kind of a little bit more of a culture shock because you don't see that here a lot. Everyone here is still really welcoming. I never really felt scared coming here until we had a mass shooting where I live. It was the summer coming into my sophomore year in August at a Walmart, and a man came from I think about Dallas just because he didn't like Hispanic people, and that was his motive. So it's just really hard knowing that like people like me can be targeted in that way. And my parents were scared to send me over here, but I never questioned coming back over here because of how welcoming it was. But at the same time, it's kind of just the what ifs, and you just like never know. But coming into a community that's really friendly in that way, I wasn't scared. But it always just scared me because of how more open people were becoming with like how they see you because of your race. It just kind of worried me of like how things could go back home, or like what if I'm out in a community that I see as friendly and something happens to me that I just don't know. But the more that I'm here, the more I find people similar like me. So it feels a lot more like home, and I know that I have a home away from home in that sense, like culturally.
That's awesome, Stephanie.
Thank you. All right, so we'll go to the next question. Because I know I did research, and you hear stories, especially when it comes to slavery, about how the slaves actually, fleeing their slave owners, going down to, Central America and South America. And especially when you look at Brazil, you can see there are people, my skin color, that are, they're natives of Brazil. Like they're just from there and stuff. And so, with the question, like, is there any way, or have you ever done any research when it comes to your ancestry to see if there's a possibility that you are a Afro-Latino or Latina or Hispanic in a way?
I have. I did one of those genetic, like you send like your DNA and they tell you like all the different cultures, and it was really interesting because I do have African blood, but it's more through the Moors that lived in Spain that came with Cortez and the ships. So I never, I would have never known that unless I did a DNA testing because my family was primarily Native Mexican or Spanish. But it was interesting to see that in my blood, definitely somewhere in there, we had that. We had, obviously family members that were black, and I'm assuming coming from Spain. So, but.
I mean, I haven't done like any research or like any of it, but we always talk about like just because of our features and like especially my husband's features, his his thick eyebrows and stuff like that. We're like that's very like Aztec and Mayan and like the natives. So I think that'd be something really interesting that we could definitely look into.
Yeah, because I haven't done much research either, but if you look at my dad, he is white with green eyes, and so he knows his grandparents came from Spain, and then you see my mom's family, and we're all darker, and I'm assuming, Native Mexican, so I would like to do it, I just don't know how accurate it is, or what it all entails, so it'd be interesting to try out.
Well, and I know all of us have some sort of African blood because you have mestizos, which was Spanish and white, or Spanish and Native Mexicans, but you had Sambos, which were Africans and were Native Mexicans. Yeah. And then they started mixing to mestizos and Sambos, so for us it's just like darker brown. But I'm sure we all somewhere in there have like Afro-Latino blood, probably.
Well, for me, I would say it's just all over the place. I asked my parents, my grandmas, where is our descendants, and they basically say Italians, Portuguese, Belgians, and Africans. So it's really tough. I've never done those tests. I mean, I really don't care about it because, I mean, it's not much. It's not gonna change anything in my life. It's interesting, yes.
It's interesting, yeah.
But it's just like, you know what? It's fine. I really don't. It's not gonna change anything, and I just go based on what they tell me. And yeah, like I said, Brazil is really diverse. My grandfather was black, and I'm proud of it. I'm proud. It's just growing up in that system where, my friends were black. We were playing soccer. My friend was Asian. Also, we have a lot of Asians in Brazil. I'm from São Paulo, so there's like a 15 million people city, so it's a big city. And we have like those neighborhoods like New York, and one of them is for Asian people. So that's how diverse it is. So we also have Asians there and people from all over the world at this point. But just growing up, seeing all that diversity, it's really nice. And yeah, I might consider myself that expression.
Afro-Latino.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
I mean, I haven't really done testing, so I don't really know. But like growing up, my cousin, she kind of had like, she had like eyes kind of like tinged like an Asian American would. And our parents, our grandparents also like told us that we had like some great grandparent along the line that was from like Asia or like China. I don't really know how true that is. I don't even know if it is true. I don't know why they would tell us that. I don't know if it was just a joke for her because we pick on each other. That's just how we are. So I don't know if it was just like kind of their inside joke or if I really do. But I mean, it'd be kind of interesting to see who really do because I mean, my grandparents are the ones that would tell us that. So I don't really know why they would not tell us the truth. But I mean, I also don't really know.
So most people don't know this, probably only Annie, but my grandma is basically black. She considers herself trigueña, which is what they call themselves in Honduras. They're very dark, curly haired, and then her mom doesn't even speak Spanish. Her mom speaks the language that the indigenous people, I guess, would speak in Honduras. Yeah, so her mom speaks dialect or used to speak dialect. Um, and basically, my dad's side of the family, they're basically very light skinned Spaniards, and then got with my family, and then that's how, I guess, that's how I look now.
Okay, so this will be our follow-up question. Do you think there is racism against those who are Black Latinos, Latinas, or Hispanics in the communities?
So, like growing up, I mean, I grew up in Southern California, so I don't know if my experience is a little different, but I didn't really have racism like with friends at school. No one ever made fun of me. I mean, I am, darker complected, but I did get it like from my own family, like, oh my gosh, you're so dark, or like stay out of the sun, or I played soccer growing up, and of course, I would get darker in the sun. It was always like a thing, like, oh, how funny, like you have a soft tan. I'm like, okay, like, who cares, And I think that's like one of the things that I do see, at least, like in like my family, that sometimes like they'll kind of be like, oh, like she's darker, or like why are you so dark, like stop tanning and stuff like that. Like I have heard that.
Well, when I grew up in northeastern California, a smaller town, and it was our school was 50%, 48% Hispanic, and like 50% white, and then 2% others. So it was a really small community, and then so I did experience a lot of racism, especially because I was so proud of where I was from, and it was always like, then why don't you go back, and why this, why that, and it's gotten a whole lot better. Coming to Kansas was a culture shock because I don't think people most of the time are trying to be racist, but there's questions like, all right, well, why don't you teach Spanish instead of teaching English? And I'm like, I have to think about it, like, that's a borderline racist question. So just small stuff like that they call microaggressions, and I've learned to just not take offense, try to educate people, and opposed to when I was younger, I'd get real mad and proud, but now it takes a second to try to educate someone. Be like, man, that's probably not the right question to ask, but it's getting a whole lot better.
For me, I grew up in Dallas, like 5 minutes away from downtown, so it's considered like the inner city. So I grew up with nothing but Hispanics, blacks, and then Asians who were immigrants, and I never experienced any type of racism growing up. When I got to Kansas, it was a bit of a culture shock. I never experienced it like to my face, but when I remember my first time that I came for my recruiting visit, we went to Applebee's and I just got a bunch of weird stares. I don't know if it was me being paranoid, but I never really thought much of it. I can say when I was feeling it the most was when the elections were around. That's when it was really bad because of all the comments being made, and I guess those people who are secretly racist, they were starting to feel like they were empowered to say what they've been hiding for so long. And I remember I told Annie this story. It was about 1 week before the election. Me and a couple of my buddies, we just went to the field and we were kicking the ball around. And then some guy in a red pickup truck with a Trump flag stopped by, and he just looked at us, and like we all made eye contact, and we were just waiting for him to say something. And then he just honked and he said, "Go back to your country," and took off. And then I've seen like that type of stuff like on TV, but I never seen it like happen to me. So like me and all my friends just looked at each other, and like we were trying to figure out whether we should say something back or like do something about it, but we were all in shock that we just like laughed it out and just walked away. But that was I can most definitely say that I never experienced it in Kansas until the elections came around, and when there was so much controversy, and I guess people started feeling some type of way that they could say it if their president was saying it. So
Yeah, I mean, I've been here for 20 years, and I do have to say I've lived in the East Coast in Washington, D.C. And something that I'll say about the Midwest is probably some of the most incredible people and kindest people that I've ever met have been in the Midwest, which is why my husband and I now live here and we'll probably retire here. I do agree with Kenny. Having been here for so long and then the elections happened, that was pretty heartbreaking for me because I started experiencing stuff, not just from strangers, like in the grocery store. I'll never forget, I had my kids, and my kids are half white, half Mexican. So they speak perfect English because that was their first language, but they're starting to learn Spanish too. And I was on the phone with my dad, so I was speaking in Spanish and I was at Dylan's, and my kids are now to the point where they practice Spanish with me. And my kids were little. Back then I think they were like, I don't know, 6 and 4. And I started speaking to my oldest in Spanish, and this gentleman at Dylan's in Ohio turned around and grabbed my kid and said, speak Spanish or go home, or speak English or go home. It took all of me to not get arrested and deported that day because I was not a U.S. citizen back then. But it really shocked me because I'm like, I had seen that person and he was a patient of my husband's, and I almost said, my husband saved your life and you're literally attacking my child because he's speaking in another language. He's bilingual and you're not. It changed the environment, they changed the vibe in Salina. I think it's getting better. I think things are going back, to a place of, but it made me nervous. It was the first time that I didn't feel 100% comfortable going places, speaking in Spanish. So I do think that there is racism. I think sometimes it's dormant, and unfortunately certain things or certain people are going to bring that empowerment or empowering people to express those feelings a certain way. But I also want to say the Midwest and the Salina community, and I think that the difference in the Midwest is that sometimes the microaggressions, like Juan said, they'll say something to me that you're like, oh, okay, well that was not very like, so did your parents live in a pyramid? And I'm like, well, those stopped in 1525, but whatever. And sometimes there's microaggressions, but for the most part, what I've encountered is people actually want to learn. It's just they've never traveled, sometimes even outside of their own state or even sometimes out of the Midwest. So sometimes certain questions are going to feel like a microaggression, but if you take a breath and you remember the person that you're talking to and you start having a conversation, people actually want to learn for the most part, I think. So, but I do think that we experience it.
Well, I believe that racism is everywhere. White people towards black people towards white people. I've seen white to white, black to black. So for me, it's just everywhere. Mm-hmm. Also, I think that if you grow up in a family where they are racist, then you can be the most kind person out there. You might have like a racism like thing going on inside you because that's the influence you had your whole life. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily that you want to be racist, but you might be because of that. So, and as international, we also go through that stuff. I mean, you might look at me at first and be like, oh, he might be from Kansas, he looks kind of white and stuff like that. I've heard that multiple times. Oh, I thought you're from California. And honestly, it's just like, that's fine, but at the end of the day, you're still judging me because of my skin, And I just say, no, I'm from Brazil. And then they're like, oh, that's cool. I hear the accent now. So there's always that prejudgmental thing going, even with us. And I've heard like, oh, why all these international people are coming here and stealing our jobs and stuff. And it's just like, it's not really that. You can have your job and I can have my job. You just gotta work for it too. If you don't work for it, then someone else will take your spot. But that's not because I'm international that I'm taking your spot. I'm just putting the work in for it, So there's that side of that racism. And being around Latinos because of soccer, like, they're like my brothers. Like, I'm always going to have my brothers back. And I've seen, like, walking towards, like, let's say Walmart, like, my Hispanic friends being, like, looking, like, up and down like this as if they're going to do something wrong. And me, not because I'm white. It's just like, I look white. So it's just like, that's not really right. So I'm always standing up for that, and I always have my friends back. So that's pretty much what I've seen so far here in America. Though. So, yeah.
Well, I feel like we do not have a lot of Brazilian people in Kansas. Um, so I haven't noticed anything towards me, like any racial problems towards me, but I don't know. I feel like Florida. I've been to Florida, and there's so many Brazilians there. I just feel like people have this stereotype about Brazilians. Like sometimes I tell people, oh, I'm from Brazil, and they're like, oh, so you know how to dance, you know samba, you know how to play soccer, and I'm like, no, I don't know any of them. It's not like that. Or it's mostly towards women. I feel like they're like, oh, women from Brazil are this certain way, and it's not like that. I do not like this kind of thinking, but I feel like most people are interested when you say you're from Brazil. They're like, oh, you have an accent. Oh, how is it over there? It's so different than here. So I don't know.
I've never really personally experienced like any racism towards me. My dad has though. He went out to a concert with like his brothers, like my uncles, and they went to a bar afterwards. I believe it was they did it back home. But since they were together, they were all having a conversation. They were like really excited, like talking about what happened, just a bunch of stories. But then they realized that they had been sitting at the bar for a lot longer than they should have, and no one came to like ask if they wanted a drink or if they were gonna order food, and they were kind of just like, okay, like what is this? Like, this is kind of weird. And still, like nobody helped them. They still waited, and they eventually left. And my dad told me they went back again. I don't know how much long after, but they went back and then someone helped them. So it was probably just someone that just didn't want to help because they were Hispanic, which is crazy because we're in El Paso and there are so many Hispanics there. But like just going back to the election, this past one, I was talking to a friend about it. We were very, very honest about like our political views, and we were very open. It wasn't like a judge-free zone. And I remember talking about how I felt like just being a Hispanic, it felt kind of like dangerous because it's just a what if. Like you don't know who's gonna attack you, if anybody will end up attacking you. I've never personally experienced it, but it's just scary knowing that it could be a possibility. And they just like flat out told me that they didn't believe that Trump was a racist. And I just remember being so like speechless. And I regret not kind of like educating them in that moment. I just didn't know how to react because I've never had someone just like tell me straight out to my face like that. And I feel like they just said it because his words or his actions never had an effect on their life. It never did, but it did have an effect on mine. Even though I never personally experienced something like that, it did. So it's kind of scary knowing that people kind of have like that mindset. They just don't understand how it affects other people's lives because it doesn't affect them personally. And like racism is still a really big problem, and I wish it wasn't. I think we just really need to be educated in that sense. Like it could happen to anybody.
Anybody else want to add before we go to our final question of the evening?
What is one stereotype you would like to debunk about your culture?
So, bouncing off what Lima said, I think what makes my blood boil so much is, oh, they're taking our jobs. That makes me so mad. Because basically it's like a lose-lose situation. If an Hispanic is in the U.S. and they're not working, and I'm not just talking for Hispanics, anyone in general who's not working, they collect welfare and food stamps, right? And then they go on and say, oh, they're lazy, they're just collecting food stamps. But then if my parents are doing honest work that no one really wants to do, then you're taking their jobs. So that has always made me upset because I've personally worked the jobs with my dad, and I've seen how tough they are. He's had to work as putting chimneys in houses. He's done concrete. He's done roofing, and he honestly kills himself out there. So when people say that he's taking their jobs. I'm like, okay, well, you go out there in 115 degrees and see if you can survive a week. And not only that, but the sacrifices that they make in order for a first generation or second generation Hispanic like myself to get my college education. I did some research about a year ago because I wrote an essay, and it basically said that Hispanics is the leading group of minorities, and by the end of 2026, we'll have the most entrepreneurs. 2026 or 2036, I correct me if I'm wrong, but we'll have the fastest growing entrepreneurs when it comes to minorities. So what stuck in my head is my parents are going through all of that. So one day I can have my own business, which will open up jobs for other people, which will help out the economy. But they don't see it that way. They just see it as an excuse to not like someone because they're willing to work harder than them. So.
Well, as a Brazilian, one is we not only play soccer. I think that's a big one. We do other things. Also, something that really kind of throws me off is like comments about women, like she said, because pretty much 90% of the time when I say I'm Brazilian, a guy, usually a guy, which is fine, of course, they're gonna be like, oh, I heard that the women in Brazil are like this, and this, and that, and I'm just like, well, right now you're just pretty much talking about my mom, my grandma, my auntie, my cousins. It's just like, so how I answer to those questions is just like, look, Brazil is just like America. You're gonna find any type of people there. Black, white, Asians, tall, skinny, short. So you shouldn't be like categorizing girls like, oh, they have like, sorry for the expression, like humongous ass. Like, sorry about that, but not true. You know, you're gonna find the skinny ones too, and they're cute. So I mean, it's true. It's something that really throws me off. Like, because Brazil was built in that concept. Like, if you watch Carnival, you're gonna see ladies, like big ladies dancing in like what looks like bikinis and stuff like that. But that's part of the culture. That's the African stuff kicking in too. So like, that's what people don't understand. Like, I've heard that, oh, do you guys walk naked in Brazil? Because they think that Amazon, the forest, is all over the country. And it's not really true. It's just the north. Like north towards the left. So it's just like, what about the rest of the country? Like, you know what I mean? So just those things that, which is fine, like you said, just take a deep breath and then educate them. Just trying to explain them like what's going on in the country, and then if they want to learn, that's on them. If they don't want to learn, then I did my job, you know. So that's all I can think is about the women part for now. So I don't know about you.
I think you said everything.
Just one for me, just because I live so close to the border, is just like the stereotype that all immigrants are bad people. Not everyone is bad. I feel like there's evil people wherever you're going to go in the world. You can't just like put it on a certain group of people because they're not coming in the right way. And like we talked about earlier, it's hard to get papers. My grandparents came from Mexico, but they eventually got their papers and now they're U.S. citizens. And they've been U.S. citizens since I've been born, so I don't know how long their process took. But like, I can't even imagine like how scary it was for them to like go through that. So just like there's, like I said, evil people everywhere. You just don't know. But I think it's kind of just wrong to say that every immigrant is a bad person when we shouldn't allow it, because it's like, when we go out to other countries, technically we'd be an immigrant. I mean, we might be going with like a passport or something, but they're gonna see us as such just because we're going to just because we live in the United States. We kind of have that mentality that we think we're better than everybody, and we really shouldn't, because there's a lot of countries that hate the United States, and it's kind of just really goes back to the racism part. So I think it's just like debunking that all immigrants are bad, because they're not bad people. They're here trying to come live a better life just like we are. So like, what gives us the right to judge them just because they come from somewhere that we didn't?
Yeah. I think for me, and this one is not just Mexico, I want to talk about a stereotype that I hear a lot. I've been working at Kansas Wesleyan for 8 years as a full-time volunteer. I quit my job, and this is my passion, is working with college students. But it started as getting very involved with the soccer team, kind of being a liaison between the community and my kids. And just like Kenny said, something that makes my blood boil is when I sit in meetings or I sit with people or coaches or teachers that make the assumption that my kid's GPA is low because they don't work hard. And I've heard that before, and somebody had come to me and said, Annie, you just need to make your soccer kids work harder. They're just lazy. They're not getting their grades, their GPA is the lowest. And I literally, when I get really mad, or when I've had a couple too many tequilas to drink, I can't speak English. Like, I become monolingual. I was so angry that I had to tell him, literally on a text message, I can't speak English to you right now. I had to calm down. Once I calmed down, I approached this person, but something that I will tell you, I don't think that I've ever seen hardest working kids. Most of my soccer kids and my Hispanic kids, especially if they're first generation college students. Stephanie said it beautifully, when it is a privilege for us to go to school. Where we come from, most of our parents, my mom did not finish elementary school. She couldn't. My grandfather died and my mother had to take care at age 12 of 8 siblings, so she never finished elementary school. Smartest person I've ever met in my life. My dad was a first generation, he's an engineer, and his dream was for us to go to college. But a lot of my kids, especially the first generation college students, most of my kids have not 2 jobs, sometimes 3 jobs. Some of them work nights, then they come to soccer, then they go to a second job, then they go home and they cook dinner, The things that they have to go through to be able to be here, the stories that they have behind. If you ever come across somebody that makes a very broad statement about a fellow teammate or a fellow student that is Hispanic or Latin American, I encourage you guys to debunk that and say, have you ever asked them their story? Like, have you ever asked them where they come from? If they're first generation, second generation, if they were born in the States, if they're DACA. Because Juan's challenges were very different from Kenny's challenges, but they were still very, very high. And when you learn their stories, just like your guys' stories, like I've learned so much from the Midwest and so much from Americans by asking your guys' stories. But the biggest thing that I would debunk is when you see somebody struggling in the classroom, most of your parents went to college. Most of your parents at least finished high school. And some people don't go to college because they choose not to go to college. In our cultures, if you had the chance to go to college, it is unheard of for you to not take it. Because only 10% of the population goes to college, only 1% goes to a private school. So for us to be in college was something that our parents gave everything for us to be here. So debunk the stereotype and don't make assumptions about fellow people in Kansas.
That was a good one.
Okay. So, anybody else want to add on before we close out and leave the floor open to our audience? Okay, so the last couple minutes we'll allow the audience, if they want to ask any questions to our panelists. Don't be afraid to. We can always wrap this up. But we want to just open this up for you, the viewers, just to get more in depth about the cultures of Hispanics and Latinos. So if anybody wants to, just let us know. And our man Anthony will let you speak to a nice little audio mic.
I realized during my history class this semester that I had the privilege growing up in high school, in middle school and elementary school, learning about my rooted history in the U.S. But for those of you who grew up in the U.S., were you taught by your parents, or how did you learn about your rooted history and the nations that your families came from?
That's a good question. Oops, sorry.
Sorry, I don't want to make you wrong. I wasn't really taught from my parents what our heritage was, where we came from. I'll be honest, I don't think my mom even knows much. Like, I think it has to do with the way they grew up. I mean, you didn't ask those questions to your parents. Your parents wouldn't really give you that kind of information. So all I know is like really nothing. I have like a German grandma somewhere in there. I have something in there, but like I have no idea. I don't know if anyone feels that way.
Well, as far as like a history class goes, I remember my first time learning about my own culture was at San Bernardino Valley College with Professor Gomez. I took a Chicano history class, and that was the first time that I learned about my own history. And besides like doing our own research, because we're like the Google generation of Googling all the time, watching these videos and trying to learn for myself. But to add to what Sam said, our parents are always working, so I didn't have time to like, hey, what's our culture? But if that answers part of your question, it's my own research and going to college that really helped.
Is that something that you'll hand down to your kids?
Yeah, for sure. So now I'm first generation, she's second generation, so I don't know where he falls in that category. But he's gonna learn. I'm gonna tell him, we're Spanish colonized Mexico. This is what happened, and the Alamo and all these things that I was fortunate enough to learn. He'll get to know now.
Yeah, we want to make sure he's proud of what he is.
That's a great question, though.
So yeah, basically like them, I never learned anything in high school, but I'm such a curious guy that I love to ask questions. I obviously couldn't ask my parents because just like them, they probably don't know, or they probably don't even have time to explain it to us. My first year here in college was with my professor Anita Speck, and then I took like an American history course, and I loved it. But I was so curious because they would always talk about white people, and then they'll talk about African Americans. And then I stayed after class one day, and I was like, hey, how come you guys always talk about the problems going on back then between blacks and whites? Where were my people at the time? And then she would go on for like 40 minutes after class and just talk to me about what my people were doing at the time. And then I love having those conversations with her because I just love learning about my past history or my family's history.
I'm seeing it now because I have two boys, one 8 years old, one 11, and they are going to a private school here in Salina. And it's really interesting because they don't cover any history from Latin America at all. So, and I don't know if they should or they shouldn't. I think part of it is just for us parents, for my husband and I. And my husband, I'm very fortunate. He is American, 100%, born and raised in Kansas. He speaks very good Spanish, which is unfortunate because I used to be able to get really mad at him and just be able to go off in Spanish and he would not understand, but that's not the case anymore. So my kids are able to speak Spanish, both with me and my husband now. But we're making it a point that we're making it fun, and because they're getting all the U.S. history through school, we're making it a fun stuff where every month they have to do a project where they have to research something about Mexican history. And we make it kind of like a part of our dinner conversations and our car ride conversations. But it's incredible because it's allowing me to go back to my own history and remember where I come from, where my mother comes from. But to see that spark in my kids' eyes and to be able to kind of relive that history, and like Sam said, to make them proud. Because even though they're half Mexican, I really want them, because they're going to kind of face what Stephanie had to face. My kids are not Mexican enough to fit in with the 100% Mexican kids. And they're very assimilated in U.S. culture, but I want them to be able to be proud about both. So I think that's not something we're going to see in the schools necessarily. I think that's going to have to be at home. So.
I mean, I didn't grow up here in the U.S., but I have like a good example. Like I feel like maybe the educational system could be a little better as far as like teaching other cultures, I guess. Like just as an example, this one girl, me and my brother, we had to introduce ourselves to this class back in our JUCO, and we're like, oh, Christian Lim, I'm from Brazil, blah, blah. And then towards the end of the class, she just came to us and she was like, oh, so how it was to grow up in Europe? And I was like, I took a deep breath, I was like, maybe she doesn't know, it's fine. But she was in college, so I was just like, But I was like, well, we actually grew up in South America. And then she was like, South America? So what language you guys speak? I was like, Portuguese. So I feel like, there's a lot of improvement that could go on. So,
Anybody else from our audience want to ask a question for our panelists?
Well, first, I just want to say I appreciate you guys for talking about y'all's culture, y'all's heritage. I feel like that's really valuable for us to learn and know more about. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
I guess the question I have was, for the ones who weren't from America originally, how would you guys learn to speak English? Did you have to teach yourself, or did someone kind of help you guys?
I think for Christian, Diane, and myself, interestingly enough, I think for, at least in Mexico, it is very common to have language schools. So most schools, we have private and public schools just like here. Private schools are not as expensive as U.S. private schools are, so it's common for middle and lower class people to still be able to go to private schools. And in private schools, you'll always take, like for my high school, you had to graduate with French, English, and Spanish. Like you had to. It was part of the program. But my parents, they were both what now we would say like semi-bilingual. Like they thought they were bilingual. If they would have come to the U.S., they would have found out pretty quickly that they were not. They knew they could understand a lot of English. They probably could not be able to speak that much. We would go to language school after school, at least for me in Mexico, and that was just my parents' desire for us to be able to be bilingual. And for me, it started more in the high school years. I took it in elementary school, but it was colors, animals, nothing that would have given me the chance to have a conversation. Once I got to high school, knowing that I wanted to go to college and I wanted to go to a private college, I had to pass a proficiency test in English in order to be able to be accepted. So I think for most of us, you have to have some sort of degree of English proficiency when you're going into your high school and then your college years. So, but it's a lot easier than here.
I can answer that.
Yeah.
So mine was a little different because I came young. So I just remember my grandma had 11 kids, and 7 of them were in this small town in California. So I had like 30-something cousins. There was like 10 of us the same age, and so they spoke English. So when I got here in kindergarten, I had to learn, and it was with them mainly. We have like our own little language even to this day. Like when you speak with somebody who's like Latino or Hispanic, we have like our own little like Spanglish essentially. And so that's what it was. It went from Spanish to Spanglish to English, and then I graduated from ESL program. I was like in 5th grade, proudest day of my life, and so it was through school and my cousins for me.
And watching TV.
And a lot of TV.
That is true, though. When I came here, I had a college degree, and I was supposed to be trilingual. And I remember going and applying for jobs, and I'm like, I'm going to have to get better at English, because I could understand everything. But it was really hard for me to like speak it back, and I think part of it was just fear. Because you have to like lose the fear of sounding silly and sounding dumb and saying things that, yeah, I could go into that, but it's YouTube, so no. But one of the things that I started doing is I started watching cartoons of all things, because they speak so slowly and so clearly. And this is back in the day, so this is going to show you how old I am. But I literally would put like masking tape on the bottom, because it would have like the subtitle. So I would cover it, and then I would try to speak it. So for like the first 6 months, my husband's like, "You're speaking like a toddler." I'm like, "But I have to learn humor. I have to learn idiomatic expressions. I have to learn slang." Like people were like, "Stop pulling my leg," and I'd be like, "I'm not touching you." And it's like, "No, like this is just," or beating around the bush. I'm like, with what? I mean, everything is so different, and the accent was also very different. So language school, movies, cartoons, family, cousins.
Well, I started learning English when I was about 10. I'm 22 now, so pretty much 12 years back and forth with it. One thing that Annie said, like at least 30 minutes ago, was the fact that nowadays in those countries, either you speak English or you don't, because like to get jobs is a requirement now. So, and even Spanish, like Spanish is going towards like third language in Brazil. So once you're done with the English, the course, then the next one is Spanish. and that's what I did. Like I was done with the English course. I thought I was like, like my proficiency, like my I was like fluent and stuff like that. And then when I got here, I was like, oh, wait a second. Yeah, I'm not that good, But once I was done with English back there, I started Spanish. So, and the private classes, like just like she said, I don't come from a rich family, but my family, my parents, my mom had to drop nursing school so she could take care of the house and me and my brother. And my father, he would work all day, so we were like considered like middle class, and we were lucky to have access to those things like English private class and stuff like that. So I've always been between like the rich kids from school, but like the poor kids from my family, and also soccer. So I know both realities pretty well. So and just learning the language like helped a lot, I guess, because now I'm here. So. I love it. Sounds good.
Okay, so time constraints. I know it's very late at night. A lot of us like to get some quality sleep. I know some of us have 8 a.m.s, maybe 7 a.m. But I just want to thank you all for volunteering to be a part of this panel. This is a big event, and it's going to lead to a lot of opportunities for us. We want to have more talk specials like this, to where we're just able to just get the people together of the community and have discussions like this. And so I just want to say thank you. We give a round of applause for our panelists. It was definitely a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. There's a lot of things that I was able to listen and learn, and a lot of things I was able to relate to, which is very interesting. This is how you break down our differences and really just find that we have a lot of things in common. One thing I love, and I learned this when I was in California, is that, especially you're talking about the fighting spirit when it comes to Mexicans. And I played junior college at Santa Monica College, and we had a lot of Mexicans on the team. And that's one thing that they always talked about, that like that fighting, like determination, that Canelo mentality in a way, just like to keep on going. And I was always fascinated by that, because I was like, that's really just like, almost like having that chip on your shoulder. And even if you get it off, you're still just wanting more, because there's so much that you have to prove. Even when you reach it, you still want to go. And I always found that like fascinating and motivating in a way. And I was like very like loving in a sense. I just want to say, thank you all for telling your stories and being very true to yourself, and just explaining and letting everybody know that be proud of who you are and be proud of your culture. I think that's the biggest thing. That the United States, there's a lot of cultures in here. I know we talk about let's be a melting pot, but I think Jane Elliott talked about being a tossed salad. It's okay to have tomatoes, different type of leaves, different sauces. Nothing's wrong with that. It's still going to be a great salad. Allow ourselves to have our differences, and just allow yourself to express your culture and be proud of your culture, love your culture, flaunt it and show it, because that's something that's very beautiful.
The salsa.
So thank you all for coming out for tonight. Our next talk event won't be until 2 weeks, so it's a good little bye week for us. It'll be around, I think, October 13th, which will be our little homecoming show. So we'll be making sure we'll keep you updated on what topics that we'll be doing. We'll most likely be putting polls on our social media. I don't have the TV screen now, but there are flyers around the campus. If you scan the QR code, it takes you to a link to all our social medias, our podcasts, our YouTube. Make sure you check that out. And like I said, it also has our schedule as well for our different talk events. So just thank you all for coming. This was a very great event. Make sure everybody gets home safe, do your homework. Academics, education matters. And stretch too, because I know everybody plays sports in this event. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Andrea.